Hi guys, so on Sunday evening, a perfect storm is brewing and Boris Johnson is going to be the captain of the ship to sail through that storm. So this is a multi-pronged problem and crisis. You have ports being blocked because the French government have decided that they don't want lorries coming into France from the UK because there's a risk that they could carry this new strain of the pandemic. You have trucks who have been queuing to get into the UK because they have been delivering goods that are being stockpiled because of Brexit and Christmas, but principally Brexit. And then you also have the airports basically closed because British people are not allowed travel into certain European countries, and it's difficult for people to get back home. And of course, you also have people in different parts of the country abandoning the place that they're in at the moment in order to avoid the tier 4 lockdown. What a disaster. And of course, Boris Johnson is at the eye of the storm. But part of this could have been avoided. What I'm talking about is Brexit. These tailbacks in order to get into the UK or to get out of the UK, all of this stockpiling could have been avoided if Boris Johnson had asked for an extension to the transition period back in June, when it was possible. And the pandemic was raging at the time. He could have asked for an extension to avoid some of these problems. But he said no. His arrogance and his fear of his backbenchers forced him to say, no, we don't want an extension. We're going to fight both the pandemic and deal with Brexit at the same time. So let's see this report.
There's a real sense of crisis here this evening, particularly over the travel ban, not just here but throughout Whitehall. Now, Number 10 has announced that the Prime Minister will chair a COBRA meeting tomorrow to discuss the situation regarding international travel, particularly the steady flow of freight in and out of the UK. There's going to be further meetings this evening, tomorrow morning, to ensure what Number 10 calls robust plans are in place. Now, the big fear here is over freight. If freight is not being able to come in and out, we're told that is very serious. The government is actively tracking how many days food is left on the supermarket shelves.
Tracking how much food is left on supermarket shelves. This is a real crisis. And you have Boris Johnson in charge. I can't think of a worse politician, I can't think of a worse prime minister you could have in charge than Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is incapable of getting a grip here. He's always looking over his shoulder. What can I do to not piss off this group of people? What can I do to not piss off this other group of people? We've seen it with the lockdown. We've seen it with these new tiers. We've seen it with Brexit, of course.
If the ports shut, some foodstuffs will run out. That is the big fear. Now, Tory MPs are very unhappy about this. They are saying that the Prime Minister needs to get a grip. That's Roger Gale, a Kent.
Okay. Boris Johnson needs to get a grip. Boris Johnson can't get a grip.
MP, and also on Brexit, Nicola Sturgeon is now saying it's imperative that the Prime Minister seeks an agreement to extend the Brexit transition period.
Now, this is interesting. Is it possible for Boris Johnson to extend the transition period? Well, in the past I said no. I didn't think it's technically it is possible, but politically it would be impossible. And what I was talking about at the time was, Boris Johnson has the numbers. He could ask the Labour Party to support the government. There are the crazy lunatics in the ERG who would vote against the government. They would make a lot of noise. But as I said at the time, I said, trying to deal with the pandemic and Brexit at the same time is insanity. And what you need to do is park Brexit, extend the transition period for a year, for 2 years, whatever is necessary. It will actually help you maybe get a good deal after that because you won't have a limited time frame. but deal with the pandemic first and then deal with Brexit. And at the time I said that's what Boris Johnson should be doing. Now, I could never have predicted that there would be a new strain and this would cause Britain's neighbours to close the borders. That was, nobody could have predicted that. But the idea of dealing with two massive crises at the same time was hubris and insanity.
And because she's talking about a profoundly serious situation, and it would be unconscionable to compound it with Brexit, she said.
Now, the idea, could it be possible? Yes, it could be possible, but it would require Boris Johnson to ask Parliament to extend the transition period. He'd also have to ask the EU to extend the transition period. Now, I don't know if there's time for that. You would require an emergency sitting of Parliament and an emergency sitting of the European Parliament. They would have to agree. I think the European Union would agree to it on humanitarian grounds. The UK is is facing a massive crisis here. This is on humanitarian grounds. I think the EU would say, look, you're facing a massive crisis. You're not able to cope. Brexit is just going to create more problems. We have the legislation put in already to end the transition period at the end of the year. If you're not ready, we'll throw you a life preserver. We'll extend the transition period for 6 months or whatever. I don't know the ins and outs, the technical nuts and bolts of that on the EU side. But in Parliament, I think it's quite easy. Boris Johnson just needs to explain the situation to the public, explain it to Parliament, ask for Keir Starmer to support him in extending the transition period. The SNP, other parties would agree with him. The people who would not agree with extending the transition period, the people who would be happy to see the country burn, would be the ERG and the hardline Brexiteers. Now, I don't know if there's enough of them to stop it. I don't think so. I think it would sail through Parliament an extension to the transition period. But it would be the end of Boris Johnson's career. So Boris Johnson has to he's facing a serious crisis here now, and he has to make a very big decision. Is he going to extend the transition period and save the country from massive disruption and damage and death in many cases? Or is he going to look over his shoulder and look at the ERG and listen to what they have to say?
Says the Labour Party's Rachel Reeves is calling on the Prime Minister to get a grip, and as we've heard, Grant Shapps is telling people not to go to those Channel ports. A real sense of crisis here. Critics will say the government has been slow to react, but the Prime Minister clearly wants to get a grip tomorrow, starting with a COBRA meeting, which they'll obviously, top of the agenda is the threat to food supplies.
The threat to food supplies. Once again, this could have all been avoided if Boris Johnson had taken his finger out of you-know-where and got a grip and understood this is a real crisis. I can't fight two battles at the same time. I can't fight Brexit and I can't fight COVID. I have to decide one or the other. And unfortunately, he looked over his shoulder. He looked at the ERG. The ERG said, well, no, if you don't deal with Brexit, you're going to be in serious trouble. And unfortunately, he listened to them, and now this is where we are. On Monday, he's going to have his COBRA meeting. Let's see what comes out of that. But this is a serious crisis. 48 hours doesn't sound like a long time for the ports to be closed, but you're talking about thousands of trucks not being able to enter the UK. Those trucks are carrying food, they're carrying essential services. We've seen what happened at the beginning of the pandemic, where people were stockpiling toilet paper. They were close to rioting. This could happen again. and this was all avoidable. The part regarding the pandemic, no, it was not avoidable. Or part of it was avoidable, but a new strain was not avoidable. But the Brexit aspect was completely avoidable, and Boris Johnson has to take responsibility for that. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot. I want to say a big thank you to all of my patrons. You ensure that this channel continues to exist. I'm eternally grateful for all of your support. If you join Patreon, you will receive instant access to our Discord server, where we have both audio and video chats. You can chat with me and other patrons, where we discuss important and non-important issues. Becoming a patron per month costs about the same as a large coffee, so why not check it out?